Okay, I'll get started now because I am aware it's just gone to 25 and I don't want everyone just sitting there reading this screen forever. So this is a sort of screen that I'd have, obviously not the hello, welcome, get started quite like that on the screen when students may be coming into a classroom to get them thinking while they're all settling and getting their equipment out. I'm a secondary art and design teacher. I teach from year 7 through to, well, sometimes sixth form, depends on which school I'm working in. So for those of you from outside the UK, year 7 is age 11 and I teach all the way up to like age 18. So one of the things I found really important and vital over the years of my teaching is linking understanding of what art is about and how it's made. So skills and contents, knowledge and content, skills, all that stuff, all linked in together. It's a big melting pot. So they are. It's interesting. Sometimes you see these sort of debates between knowledge-rich curriculums and skills-rich curriculums, and I'm sort of on the fence because I think we need both. So one of the things that I realised over time from being a newly qualified teacher to the 20 odd years of experience I've had now is that the sort of artworks that we introduce our students to and the sort of artists that we introduce our students to are incredibly important in terms of involving them in the conversation. So if we're showing our students artworks by artists who have no connection to them, have no connection to their culture, interests or history, we're in danger of switching them off or making them think that art is a space for a certain type of person and not for them. So I'm just going to flip straight through that one. So what we've been looking at in my department, I've just moved to a new school, and in my last school and the school before that did exactly the same thing, looked at the curriculum delivery and the diversity and range of artists that we were looking at for inspiration, and looking at that from a range of aspects in terms of all different types of diversity. So diversity, not just in terms of ethnicity, but also in terms of gender, ability, disability, experiences, all sorts of things. So basically broadening the landscape of what we were introducing our students to visually, and then the thought processes that we were exploring because of that. So I'm a real believer that the visual arts can stimulate, develop and provoke our students to think about lots of different things. Just the other day, one of my students says, "Miss, is this an art lesson or PSHE lesson?" And I often get that sort of question, "Miss, why are you talking to us about science?" or whatever it is. And I explicitly make the link as often as possible, probably boring my students to death, about how art covers everything. Art is about everything, art links to everything, that creativity and art and visual engagement with the world isn't something that just happens in a box in a classroom, and that although in schools our timetables are little boxes of subjects, that in reality all those boxes merge together into one big melting pot. They are not just discrete things that we walk away from after an hour's lesson or however long your lessons are. So one of the things that I think can happen, maybe hopefully not so much these days, but I remember as a student myself at school, our art teachers were mostly focused on skills. So we would draw from things and then make prints from those drawings. And that was really sort of about it, to be honest. And it didn't really make me think much about what I was doing or why I was doing it. Luckily, I had parents who were artists. So that's where all the thinking happened in my creative world as a child. And also outside the art room, a lot of really exciting stuff happened in other classrooms. I loved my history teacher, for example. I learned a lot about critical thinking from her. So critical thinking is the ability to analyze and evaluate, and I think we do that a lot in art. I think it's one of the really sort of core things that we should be doing with our students, getting them to look at their own work and the work of others and evaluating its effectiveness, the way that they've used elements to communicate a message, etc. And I was reading an article, the importance of creative thinking in the arts and education, about, and this quote just stood out for me, that we must foster creativity and creative thinking in students first if we're to ever ensure that creative thinking happens in the adult world. And we need creative thinking, I think, more so than ever more with the amount of challenges that the human race is facing already and will be facing in the future. We need creative thinkers, people who can look at situations, critically analyze them and come up with solutions with new innovative solutions that haven't existed before, so that we can survive as a human race. So the process of critical thinking, I've just nicked this straight off the internet. So we analyze, we communicate, and one of the things that I've seen lots of evidence for in the research around looking at why critical thinking and creativity is such an important thing is the idea of open-mindedness. And one of the things that I think is really important, and something that the arts can do, not just the visual arts, but all the arts can do, is get students to think about things from other people's perspectives and to be more sympathetic and empathetic towards other people's experiences and places in the world beyond their own understanding and own experiences. And I think that's an incredibly vital part of what we do as educators, that we open students' minds and allow them to gain understanding of other people's perspectives and align that with their own, and realize that there isn't a black and white world out there, that there's lots of grey areas, and that we need to have more empathy for others to be able to get on as the human race and work things through and reduce bigotry and closed-mindedness. One of the things I've seen one of my DT teachers using was the Scamper technique, but having looked it up and talked to him about it recently, I've realised that this is not just a DT approach. This is an approach that can be used in lots of creative practice. So just to throw that into the mix for you, if anyone hasn't looked this up, have a look at using this Scamper technique when you're thinking about using artwork as inspiration for a piece of work of your own, whether it's creative writing, designing a product, performing something, whatever it is. You can use elements of the Scamper technique to change what you're doing, to redevise it. So you could actually put an artwork in the middle of here, talk about the artwork, and then use some of or all of these different approaches to use that artwork as inspiration for a piece of work that the students or group of students are doing. So that's a new way that we're looking at working in our school. So one of the things that is really important is thinking about curriculum design. How do we create projects that layer upon the skills we've already built? So what skills we build for, in my school, obviously we start at year 7, but we know they're coming in from primary, but we don't have any influence over that. But what do they do when we get them in year 7? How do we then build on that in year 8 and year 9? And then hopefully move forward with a group of them through to year 10, 11 and beyond. So one of the things I think we all need to think about is the core themes that we're designing our curriculums around, and that can be in any subject area as well. So we don't have to just use artworks in art. I've seen some amazing work done by all sorts of different kinds of subject teachers and in primary schools as well, using artworks to stimulate all sorts of conversations and stimulate interesting approaches to exploring subjects and themes in many different ways. So I think one of the things that we can do is have a look at our curriculum and think about, are there ways that we can visually stimulate, especially when maybe a subject is quite text heavy? Are there images we can use to re-engage students who may be struggling with engaging with that amount of text? And what could we do to sort of help them with that? So our curriculum in art and design, we look at in year 7, their students' sense of self and also their understanding of the space they live in. So I teach in a London school, so we do a project looking at London and exploring creating a piece of work for the 4th plinth in Trafalgar Square, and then looking at them, what they physically look like, but also what their sense of identity is and how we can symbolise and represent that. And then from that we look at moving into architectural environments and senses of community and responsibility, with an emphasis on environmentalism. And then in year 9, we move towards more issues-based explorations, where we look at bigger issues, and then students hone in and choose specific topics that they want to work on. And in all 3 of these, we look at specific sets of artists as inspiration for our students. And then we encourage students to go off and we give them a sort of a bank of other artists that they can then look at in more detail. But we spend time building the skills for looking and thinking in each group. So in year 7, we focus on a core group of artists and look really very, very closely at analytical skills and understanding how an artist makes a work, and then how they use particular aspects of that to communicate a message. And then we build on those skills in year 8 and 9. So by the time they get to 10 and 11, the majority of our students are quite able to work independently on those skills, with some support from us, obviously. So the image that we were looking at the beginning of the talk, Pablo Picasso, seems to have popped up a few times today, this image. This is unfortunately an image by a dead white man, but it is still a really important one. And I don't remove all dead white men from our curriculum. I just make sure that they are mixed up with a whole load of others, so that students don't think it's only dead white men that make art. So one of the sort of set of questions that I've asked students before about this artwork is, and I always sing the song in my head, war, what is it good for? And then who does war benefit and how, who suffers and why? Does the UN still work? Sometimes, obviously, I have to clarify what the United Nations are, because not all our students know. What other questions could this artwork raise? And I don't ask them that question. Well, I do actually sometimes ask them what other questions have they got about the artwork. And then I try and find interdisciplinary links between what we're talking about and others. So I ask them, sort of, when we're talking about war and things like that, and the impact it has on people, or the horror and the pain, I ask them if they've got other have they talked about these aspects in other topic areas. So currently we are researching this artwork with one of my year 9 groups, and they're doing the Second World War in history. So that was a great connection, because they're literally learning about the history of the Second World War, which does link into what happened in Guernica. So that's really nice when you can make those links and make that bigger picture stuff happen for the students as well. So if you're lucky enough to have a curriculum overview map of the content of what's being delivered across subjects in your school, then use that to help you sort of make those links. If not, if you happen to maybe be able to be on walkabout duty or whatever things happen in your school, and pop into other subject areas or talk to other subject leaders or other subject teachers about what's happening and what they're teaching in their subject areas, making those links, making it more connected, makes it more important. It's not the right word, but the kids really sort of link in more and see the importance of looking at artwork and how it can connect to other experiences and other understandings of the world around them as well. So one of the things that I have been thinking about quite carefully, because I'm currently working with some very newly qualified teachers, and there are some, and trainee teachers as well, and sometimes they have chosen images or artists that can be a little bit contentious. So we do have some interesting conversations around which artists you should and shouldn't use in the classroom. So do be aware of that when you are thinking about artworks or artists, because sometimes they may stimulate critical thinking, but they may also stimulate other conversations you might have with parents, apologising for why, when their child Googled for so-and-so, they came up with all sorts of other interesting information about that artist, to put it lightly. So what's really important, I think, when we're looking at artists or artworks that we choose for our schemes of work, is how do we link the artworks to the core learning? What's the core purpose of what they're doing, and how does that artwork really help to underline that? Like I said, careful consideration of choice of image and artist. If you've chosen an image, it's great, but you know that artist has other artwork that could be problematic. Don't not use it, but warn the students. So obviously it does depend on the maturity of the students, but do warn the students that there may be some other artworks by that artist that might be a little bit interesting, that they might not want to look at, for example. And then really think about the kind of questions that you can ask about an artwork. So I gave some examples at the beginning of the presentation. And then also think about the order or the type of questions that you're asking as well. I know that in our school we teach mixed ability classes, so I think quite carefully about which students I'm going to target to ask what kinds of questions first, and then extend those questions with the students that I know are able to be a little bit more deeply analytical. So an example of using another artist, this is Frida Kahlo, a very interesting artist for so many different reasons. Her whole life could be used to teach, I think, nearly all subjects in the school. Very inspirational person who, and also there's a lot of really interesting information out there that students can use to engage with, to build their learning as well. So I was just going to ask you, what if you could, in the chat, and I'm not sure if I can see any chat, but what questions or links come to mind when you look at this image? So if you could type anything into the chat, anything that comes into your mind, what questions come into your mind when you look at this image, or links to, say, to certain subject areas or anything like that? Ah, there's the chat. Why is the inside on the outside? Dual existence, interconnection, pain and love, attachment, acceptance, self-love. Wearing your heart on your sleeve, being open and honest, even in a brutal way. Hearts, but are different. Awareness. Self-critical, sapphic. Two sides to everybody, at least. Repairing. Okay, so if I told you she painted this image after she divorced her husband, Diego Rivera, and so the one on the left is her marrying, her image of herself when she married him, and the image on the right is the image of herself in traditional Mexican dress, which was the way he really loved to see her. Does that change any of those comments or questions that you had about this artwork? Yep. She changed for him. Conformity, yeah, yeah. So it's really interesting how just one image can generate so many sort of thinking words, and obviously we're typing very quickly, but in a classroom, change and transition. Yeah, excellent. Identity inflicted upon her, or is she claiming back her identity? In terms of thinking about identity, this is a great artwork for having conversations. Oh wow, Penny, that's amazing. Your neighbour's dad knew Frida. That is so cool. Linking your past and present self. Yep. So so I'm just going to turn my timer off. So one artwork can just trigger so many questions and so many conversations around things, depending on depending on the image that you are using, and also the topic that you frame it in. So great questions, guys. See, I knew you were going to. So can critical thinking skills be linked to the improvement of society and educational progress? So I would say from personal experience and also from research that critical thinking helps to empower students, gives them a voice, literally. It can also help to develop their sense of autonomy so they can work independently, which is way better for their educational progress rather than waiting to be spoon-fed by us. It can help them grow their confidence, supports them to develop problem-solving skills, and also develop a growth mindset, none of which I think any of us would deny as skills we don't want our students to be adopting. So yes, I think that definitely supporting educational progress, and depending on the kind of conversations that you are encouraging your students to engage with. So we talk about, so for example, environmental responsibility, whose responsibility is it when we're doing the environmental projects in year 8? And when we're talking about issues-based information in year 9, and we're talking about, say, war or bullying or racism or the COVID crisis, whatever the issues are that the students decide to focus on, we have discussions about who can do what to change the world, and then talk about how everybody can. We shouldn't just be sitting back and waiting for someone else to do it for us. So I'm going to leave you with some tips. Choose artworks that connect to the learning in order to encourage investigation and question making. Apologies for that random capital E. Use a broad and diverse range of artists and artworks that represent cultures and experience well beyond their own, and I'm talking about the students then, as well as reflecting themselves. I currently work in a school with a very high Muslim population, so I try and make sure that we're looking at artists who are from a Muslim origin, but also introducing the students to artists from artists all over the world as well, not just reflecting themselves, but also reflecting the huge range of artists from all over. And then explore the connections between what you are teaching in the art room and your other subjects areas and beyond. So not just other subjects in the school, but what you know about the world and what's going on in it at the moment, all those sorts of things. Bring all that into the classroom, enliven your teaching, and engage your students in that sort of thinking process as well. So if you want to know more or need coaching advice or any developmental work, my website is theartpad.org, and I'm at Art Teach Jess or at theartpad1, and my email is jaustin.burdett@theartpad.org. Any questions? Stick them in the chat now. I'll try and open it again. Lost it. So any questions about anything that I've been talking about today?
Jess, can I speak rather than talk?
Yeah, sure, Nick, go for it.
Yeah, you like what you're going to say. No, I just think that I think it's really interesting how the development within like 7, 8 and 9 that you just talked about, and I really do believe that we need to start try to encourage people like year 5 and 6 to start this development of critical thinking. I know that I've done it in the past, because I'm not in the classroom anymore, but I was in a school yesterday and was actually looking at a tableau. We were looking in drama, so we were looking at a tableau, and I was asking them to think about the situation. What feelings do you get from this, and what do you think's happening? And the children really did. They respond really well. So I guess my question is, how can we sort of like bridge that gap between primary and secondary so that we're getting children at a very early age to start to develop that critical thinking within the creative arts?
Yeah, great question. I mean, obviously I'm in secondary school, so it's really hard to sort of have an impact on that apart from sort of joining in conversations like this and on Twitter. But I know that Dilys has produced a pre-recorded piece on the website that basically shows her the impact of the arts in her school, basically turned her whole primary school into a kind of art gallery, which is amazing. Only up the road from where I live, actually. I do sort of go past there regularly on the bus, and they've got a mural on the side of their wall and all sorts of stuff. It's a very creative looking place. Thank you everybody for saying thank you, by the way. I don't have, Natalie, any favourite top 3 Muslim artists. I have a whole range and I can't think of any of the names off the top of my head. So I'm a bit rubbish about that. But if you put your email into the chat, I will have a look at the resources that we've got in schools. We've got so many. Thank you, Sam. How can we broaden our range of artists? Yeah, good. I mean, it does take a bit of work. I would say one of the things that I have had to spend lots of time doing is going past the sort of main sources of information that we go to for artists. I think a lot of the big art galleries are now becoming more diverse in the kind of art they show too, which is great. But there are a lot of resources on traditional places that are very sort of dead white men based, and I think we need to put a bit of work in and look for a wider body of artists and artworks that we can show our students. Thanks, Flo.
Jess, what would you say? Because I know in secondary there's a huge kind of impact from the pressure on each individual subject to succeed in their area. And I know that in the arts, to a large extent, we're quite lucky in that they lend themselves naturally to opening up other avenues in terms of cross-curricular. What would you say to the subjects that would argue that they don't have the time or the space in their curriculum to promote arts as cross-curricular?
I'd say they're probably missing a trick, because if we're looking at engagement, the visual arts and the arts in general are very just naturally engaging, and therefore that's one link in that you can hook students into discussing something. So if you look at an English teacher teaching a really good lesson on war poetry, they're going to be using imagery. They may well be showing some poetry readings or some dramatization from the First or Second World War to link those students in to understand the sort of deeper meaning behind what they're looking at. So I think that it's may well be more a lack of confidence rather than the fact that they're worried about taking time away from the content that they need to teach. I think that we are out of time now. I think there's another session that we all need to be heading off to, but thank you so much, everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you for all your feedback. And yes, thanks. Yeah, and you're right, some teachers are scared of art. and we do need to make them feel safe. So yeah, maybe a bit more CPD on it in our schools as well. Yeah.
And money.
Oh no, I can teach off the back of an envelope. It's all right. If the Prime Minister makes up his policy from the back of an envelope, I'm sure we can teach off the back of one. Thank you, everyone.